So words of welcome over, let's dip straight into our project, and if you have any comments about the content or any other suggestions, please feel free to contact me at runnymede@btinternet.com, and I'll repeat that later. Now, the Constitution, most people think, is a dry and quite boring subject. It isn't. The Constitution has really been in existence for thousands of years. The man in the street represents 95% of the population. So what about the man in the street? He or she hardly escapes criticism for the problems we're facing today. For decades, told by politicians this group or that group was entitled to be considered a special case, the man in the street forgot about things like using his brain to determine right from wrong, considering his fellows as he would wish to be considered himself, gaining in life only through his own honest labour, not through lying, betraying and deceiving. Consider the following. This is a quote from a friend of mine. The only reason some people get lost in thought is because it's unfamiliar territory. How true. For years, first as a coordinator for No to ID, and then in the Constitution movement, I have tried talking to people. It is so noticeable when you talk to someone who has not considered anything for years. You can almost hear the brain whirling and the cogs failing to line up. We must demand sustainability, security with dignity, through total accountability for the benefit and welfare of all. So here we have it. Basic, honest dealings as a general behaviour model for a civilised society. Hardly rocket science, you might think, yet I can remember being born into a country I both admired and respected, where such behaviour was the norm. What on earth happened to this country? A country I now heartily despise, and where I feel ashamed because of things like the Iraq War, the fact that Blair continues to walk the streets and is not prosecuted for taking the country into an illegal war, despite all the public protest, he just ignored them, where the killing of Johns and Menendez was not redressed by those in charge of the operation being brought to court, where Dr. Kelly was murdered, and where over 300 people have died in police custody. Yet no one has been taken to court to account for a single death. This is not the country I was born into. People like myself have complained till the cows come home. Nothing is redressed. So what do we do now? I suggest that we look at the Constitution to find redress. Unfortunately, my personal observation of our society is that the overwhelming section of the population prefer to get on with a good life, with their drugs, with their alcohol, or both. They have no interest in displaying personal integrity. This is why the Constitution movement will never attract the majority, not until at least we are seen to be achieving something. I started the huge task of logging the results from the last election. Remember that when the election took place, indeed when the previous election had taken place, the real situation regarding the war in Iraq was well known. Yet people still voted Labour. Yes, they did. Of the people who voted, the overwhelming majority, say more than 90%, voted for the Lib Lab Con. It was clear to most people that if you voted for the Lib Lab Con, the country, despite Call Me Dave and his so-called cast iron promise, the country would remain in the EU. Look at the blogs now, full of people ranting that they will never again vote for either of the three main parties. I'll believe it when I see it. Most people, despite knowing the criminal tendencies of so many in Parliament, at the very least minimal to unmeasurable levels of integrity amongst the MPs, still felt constrained to vote for the Lib Lab Con, just like Pavlov's dog. Have an election, vote blue, yellow or red. Then they're surprised when the MPs and their bosses, whoever they may be, take no notice when they make representation to have problems resolved. Our membership of the EU is a case in point. The duplicity involved in the debate last week concerning the EU bill was, according to many commentators on the blogs, a total farce. How can we, the people in the street, not represented anywhere, turn the tide? The Constitution movement needs to contact those people who see the world in our terms. Holding meetings can prove expensive. Publicising meetings is prohibitive. I'm hoping that with the cooperation of listeners to this show, the constitutional movement will find those people who understand at least a little of why this country, and indeed the world, is in a mess, and will want to do their bit to put things right. The question is, how do we attract people who think as we do? How do we change people's perceptions to start realising that we have a solution that will work? The general public, in my opinion, have a lot of growing up to do. In general, people need to stop shrugging their shoulders and show rather more personal responsibility than is generally shown today. We can't force people to change. We can, however, interest them in a new and legal idea to bring about change. Of one thing I am certain. Either we engage and interest the man in the street, or the baddies, you know who I mean, the self-styled political class, will win hands down, and we will become the next generation of slaves. Not simply the have-nots, but the have-nots and never will-haves. Politicians. Now let's consider this. From Chief Justice Hurl, he was the Chief Justice to Edward II, 1307 to 1327. I think most people listening to this programme will agree with him. In the beginning, every man in the world was free, and the law was so favourable to liberty that he who is once free and of free estate in the court of record shall be holden free for ever, unless he does something to make him villain. The politicians and judges, not to mention the EU cabal and New World Order, certainly never heard about that before now. Now let's consider this well-known quote, a speech of Oliver Cromwell on the dissolution of the Long Parliament given to a House of Commons, 20th of April, 1653. It is high time for me to put an end to your sitting in this place, which you have dishonoured by your contempt of all virtue, and defiled by your practice of every vice. Ye are a factious crew, and enemies to all good government. Ye are a pack of mercenary wretches, and would, like Esau, sell your country for a mess of pottage, and, like Judas, betray your God for a few pieces of money. Is there a single virtue now remaining amongst you? Is there one vice you do not possess? Ye have no more religion than my horse. Gold is your God. Which of you have not bartered your conscience for bribes? Is there a man amongst you that has the least care for the good of the Commonwealth? Ye sordid prostitutes, have you not defiled this sacred place and turned the Lord's temple into a den of thieves by your immoral principles and wicked practices? Ye are grown intolerably odious to the whole nation. You were deputed here by the people to get grievances redressed. Are yourselves gone? So, take away that shining bauble there. Lock up the doors. In God's name, go. I've seen this speech quoted on the blogs time and time again. Do politicians take notice? Of course not. It is the strongly held belief of people like myself who believe in the Constitution that things are going wrong in the country to such a degree that if you trace back through the source of these problems, the original source of the problem comes back to the Constitution failing to be observed. The Constitution is a huge topic. Even I cannot deal with issues in one programme. What I plan to do is to look at the problems and suggest why the Constitution is the solution to these problems. Remember, the meaning of the word constitution is higher law. When the higher law is ignored, clearly matters worsen as you go down the pecking order. The actual definition, constitution, just means higher law. The Constitution is a huge subject, and even for this programme, the researches I've done took me into areas I didn't even know existed. And the reason it's a huge subject is because we seem to have lost things with each generation. We've taken it for granted that if people tell us we've got a democracy and we are free, then we're in a democracy and we are free. Now things have got so bad, they can't keep up the pretense